In this video, you are going to be creating and publishing your very own NPM module. By the end, you'll have a published module that can be used by yourself or others. Now, the functionality for this module is going to be very, very simple. That's not what we're going to focus on. We're focusing on how do we actually set up the project structure and what commands do we need to run to get it up on the NPM repository. Once you have the module published, you can tweak the JavaScript code to get as complex as your library needs. In our case, though, we're going to start off. I'm using Visual Studio Code here. Feel free to use any editor. And what I'd like to do is just create a new folder on the desktop for our module. I'm going to make a new folder and call this one mead-module. You can go ahead and use your last name or whatever structure you want. And once it's open, what I am going to do is use the integrated Visual Studio Code terminal. This is by no means required. You can use your operating system's command prompt or terminal. I'm just using this so we can see everything in one shot without needing to switch between windows. So here we are. We have our brand new empty project. This project is going to be the module we eventually publish. So what's step one? Step one is to run npm init. Now, as we already know, npm init is just going to ask us a few questions. And if you've taken any of my courses, we mostly hit enter through all of them using the default values. And then we said yes to confirm. Now, most of these values, the things that are inside of the default package.json file, they were never really important to us. We never really tweaked them. We used scripts quite a bit, but we never edited anything else. That's because there are really two reasons that you'd have a package.json file in your project. Reason number one is something you most likely already seen. You want to use third-party NPM modules. So you use package.json to keep track of your dependencies. Now, reason number two is you want to configure your module, a module that's going to be published. So things like name, version, description. These are things that you're not going to care about if you're creating your own project. But if you're creating a module that's meant to be consumed by projects, these fields are all really important. So first up, we have name. This is your module name. In the case of React, it's React. In the case of Express, it's Express. In our case, we're using mead-module. This does need to be unique. This is what's going to show up right inside of NPM. Next up, we're going to have the version. Start off at 1.0. That's perfectly fine. And we'll tweak this as we create new releases. We'll talk about that a bit later. Next up, we got our description, just a generic text description. I'm going to type in, this is a test module. Please ignore. Perfect. After that, we have the main property, and main is really important. This tells NPM where to start things off. Where does our application code start? Right here, we're specifying that if you're trying to require this module, you're going to want to start off with index.js. Now, currently, there is no index.js file. We'll be creating one in just a second. Down below this, we have scripts. This is something you most likely have tweaked before. You might have added a start script if you're deploying to Heroku, or you might have customized your test script to run whatever test framework you're using. After this one, we got author. Author is empty string by default. We can just go ahead and type our name in there. And then finally, we have license. I'm going to swap out ISC for MIT, which is a real no-nonsense open source library license, and it's used by almost everyone. So this is it for package.json. Package.json is all set up, and we're ready to start creating the JavaScript that is going to become our module code. So to do this, we're going to create a file called index.js. You could tweak this to app.js if you want, but index.js is a super common name. Right here. Let's go ahead and crank that out, index.js. And the module functionality, as I mentioned earlier, it is not going to be groundbreaking. We are just going to export a single function, and the function is going to return a string greeting. Nothing crazy here. So let's go ahead and kick things off. What I'm going to do is use module.exports. We are going to export a function, so I'll set it equal to an arrow function. Here I'm using the ES6 arrow function syntax to create a new function. This one is going to get called with an argument, name, and down below, we can go ahead and just return a string. Now I'll be using a template string here, so I can inject the name inside of the string. If you didn't want to use a template string, you could just use concatenation, but here I'm going to say hello, and then we'll go ahead and dump their name. So in this case, I will interpolate using $sign with the curly braces, the name variable, and we can toss an exclamation mark at the end. Now, real quick, an equivalent function would just be this guy. We return a regular string, hello space. We add the name variable, and then finally we concatenate on exclamation mark. You can use this if you want. I'm just using the ES6 syntax. Perfect. So I'm going to save index.js, and now we have our module. This is all it takes. When we require this module, when we require mead-module, what are we going to get? We're going to get back our function, and we'll be able to call it. So in order to actually play around with this, what we're going to do is make a second project. And this project is going to have the module code. The other project, which will be just as simple, is going to consume this module. I'm going to go ahead and do that by creating a new Visual Studio Code window. I'll toss it over here on the left-hand side. And I'm going to crack open a new folder, mead-module-usage. And in here, we are going to try to use this code. So I'm going to try to get our library code running from inside of another project. Now I am going to use the integrated terminal over here as well. And I'll start things off by running npm init since we are going to be adding a dependency. And in this case, as I mentioned earlier, the values in package.json, they're really not important. This is never going to get published to npm. Think of this as your web application, the one that you're going to charge users for. You wouldn't publish that code. Instead, you publish library code that gets used inside of one of your projects. Now, in our case, we are going to make a very simple app. We'll have an app.js file. And in here, we are going to create a const called greeter. We are going to try to get this function into this variable. How do we do that? Well, we're just going to use require. We are going to require right here, mead-module. Next up, we're going to go ahead and call greeter inside of console.log. I'll add a call to greeter so we can print the output to the console. And I'm going to pass in the one argument it expects, a name. And I'll just type in Andrew. Perfect. Now, at this point, we are using mead-module, but we don't have it installed. And from the terminal, we could try to run npm install mead-module. But this is not a published npm module. So what comes back is a 404. npm is saying, hey, there is no mead-module inside of the npm registry. So go ahead and check that name for typos. Now, this is a problem because at this stage, we might not be ready to actually publish this module live. So what we really want to do is just come up with a way where we can play around with it, test it, and ensure that it's working as expected. And npm does give us a way to do this using the npm link commands. Link is going to allow us to require this module based off of the code in this one. And that's going to be super useful as you're building out your module. So npm link is commonly used for development only. Once you do publish your module, you're no longer going to need to use this link shortcut I'm about to show you. So the first thing that we're going to do, we're going to move into the module project. And from the root of that project, we're going to run npm link. And we're not going to run it with any other arguments. This is going to create a symbolic link in your machine. It is going to link our code defined here into the npm global module. So down below, your path is going to look different, but you should see the exact same setup with just a different folder and file structure. So what we've done here is we've essentially allowed us to use this guy globally. The next thing that we need to do is tell this project to use that symbolic link as well. npm link. And what do we want? We want mead-module, M-O-D-U-L-E. Now, when we do this, we are once again going to get a symbolic link. This time, though, instead of taking this file code and dumping it wherever npm stores its global modules, we are taking this node modules mead module folder and we're symbolically linking it to the npm global modules directory. So essentially, this is linking to the global modules folder, and that is linking over here. In the end of the day, though, the only thing you really need to know is that in node modules mead module, you should have your module code. Now we can go ahead and run node app.js. And what are we going to get? We're going to get hello Andrew printing to the screen. And this is only happening because of the code we wrote over here. Now, as we tweak this code, we're going to see different results. Let's add a comma in there. Hello, comma, Andrew. I'm going to save index.js in Mead module. And over here in the usage, I'm just going to rerun the command. And right away, you can see that everything shows up live. So we have a real-time link between our development module and the project where it's getting used. This is a super handy feature. I highly recommend setting up these links when you're working on a module that is not quite ready to be published. Just a quick note, if you are using Yarn instead of NPM, Yarn also has a link command, and it works much the same way. So you should be able to swap out npm link for yarn link over here, and the same is true over here, where we link in Mead module. All right, so we got all of this set up. Now let's say that we want to continue on with the process. Let's say we're ready for version 1. How do we get this live on the repository so we can actually use it without having to link things locally on our machine? Well, step 1 to this process is going to be creating an NPM account. So if you don't have an account, you are going to need to create one. I'm going to switch over to the browser. Right here, we can sign up or log in. I'm going to go ahead and sign up, and you just need to create a very basic profile. We're going to go through the steps, and I'm going to do this in real time. Then go ahead and come up with an appropriate username, and we'll crank out a password as well. And once we have our account ready, what we're going to do is we're going to log in from the command line. So we're going to have those credentials stored, and we'll be able to actually publish the package. NPM will know who we are. Now, we're going to do that by running npm login. You can use yarn login as well. This is going to ask you for those credentials that you just created. So in my case, it's the username and the password. Now, next up, the email. And there we go. We have successfully logged in. So make sure you are seeing this message. You're not going to be able to publish an NPM package without having an account and having that account registered locally with your machine. So from here, we're ready to actually publish this code. And we're going to do that using a command called npm publish. Right here. Not up here, down here, we're going to use this npm publish command. Once again, yarn publish also exists. This is going to go ahead and go through all of our application files. In this case, it is going to ignore node modules. It's going to take them, it's going to create a brand new version of our module on npm using this name and this version number. So by running this, we are creating version 1.0.0 of, in my case, Mead module, in your case, something with a different name. Either way, though, we can go ahead and publish this, and it's going to go through the actual process of getting your code up. And in the end of the day, right here, you should see some output like the following: the module name @ and then the version 1.0.0. So at this point, our module, it's actually published. So there's no need for those links. What I'm going to do is go ahead and remove those links. In order to do this, we can go ahead and run from the other project, npm unlink Mead module. This is going to go ahead and remove those symbolic links, and that's going to allow us to use the real version of Mead module as opposed to this development version. So how do we use the real version? Well, we know how to do that. We've installed a ton of modules before. npm install followed by the module name. In my case, it's Mead module. In your case, use your module name. Now here I didn't use save, but I most likely do want to save that to package.json. So I'm going to rerun the command with the save flag. And now what do we have? Over here in package.json, we have Mead module as a dependency, and we have the code in node modules. I can go ahead and run the application exactly as we had it before. Node app.js, and what do we get? We get the expected output. Now it's important to note that we are now using the repository code. So over here, if I make a change to how the program works and save the file, it's not going to be reflected in the usage. Right here, we are still getting the exact same code. Remember, we unlinked things, so it's no longer linking directly to this project. We now have the real published version of our module live on the repository. Now let's say we are ready for the next version of our module. We've decided to make some tweaks to Mead module. In my case, I'm going to go ahead and set up a default value for name. We're going to allow the greeter function to be called without an argument. I'm going to use the ES6 argument default syntax to set name equal to user by default. So if a name is provided, it will be used. If no name is provided, we'll just say hello user. Now let's say this is it. This is it for the code changes. We're ready to deploy a new version. What do? Well, down inside of the terminal, you might just run npm publish, but this is actually not going to work as expected. If I run npm publish, npm is going to scream at us. It's going to say you can't publish over a version that already exists. In this case, we are trying to publish a new version 1.0.0 of Mead module, and npm is not going to let you do that. It could have disastrous consequences for other projects who are using your module if you change how the API works on the exact same version. Why even use versioning then? In our case, what we need to do is we need to tweak the version. So if you're not familiar with Semver, that's what we see here. We have major version changes, we have minor ones, and we have patch releases. In this case, tweaking the API, I might consider that a minor release. So I'll go to 1.1.0. If you do want to learn more about Semver, you can Google that. I'm not going to cover it here, but it is a super useful system. That's semantic versioning. Now we can save package.json, and we're actually ready to redeploy. The question that I want to ask before we publish this new version is, how does it know which files to use? Well, in the case of our project, npm is going to look through all of the files in the folder. It is going to ignore node modules, and it's going to include everything else. Now, the problem is we have stuff like this, npm debug log that gets generated, and there are certain things we want to ignore. So what we can actually do is set up a git ignore file. Now, if you're using version control and you're using Git, you're probably already going to have one of these in place, and you're probably ignoring node modules, for example. This is something covered in all of my courses, but we can also add a little globbing pattern here to ignore all log files. This, the git ignore contents, it is also going to be used when npm publishes. So in our case, it is not going to publish the npm debug log file, even though it exists inside of the project folder. So let's go ahead and prove that by publishing the new version. From the command line, now that we've made all of those tweaks, we're going to run npm publish. This is going to publish the brand new version of our module, Mead module, that's 1.1.0, and we're going to be able to install that over inside of the usage project. So let's go ahead and use it and see exactly what happens. Now remember, by default, if I just rerun things, we are not going to get that new functionality. If I remove name and try to use the default argument, it doesn't exist just yet. We haven't installed the brand new version. So what we're going to do is install that brand new version. Let me clear the terminal output, and I'm going to run npm outdated. This is going to let us see exactly what modules we're using, what versions we want, and what the latest version is. So in our case, we got Mead module, our one dependency. Currently, we're using 1.0.0, which we installed a few minutes ago, but we now have this brand new version. We got 1.1.0. It's the latest version, and it's also a version that we want. Now, what do we mean by want? Well, it's something that's specified over here in our dependencies. We've got this little caret beforehand, which means that we want any version of Mead module that goes from 1.0.0 up to 1.x.x. So as long as it's not v2 or higher, we're good. So in our case, this new version 1.1.0, it does indeed match this pattern. We can change the first and the second, we just can't change that third guy. Now, in order to actually update, we can just run npm update. That's going to grab the brand new version. Here you can see we're grabbing Mead module at 1.1.0. And now if I run node app.js, what are we going to get? We get the hello user code printing instead of hello undefined, because we are now using the updated version of Mead module. We are using version 1.1.0 inside of this usage project. Now at this point, we've released multiple versions of Mead module, but we've forgotten to do something really, really important, which is to write test cases. Right now, we have 0 test cases. And it's one thing to write a web app and release it for others to visit on the browser and not write any test cases, but it's another thing to be giving others code that they're using in their project and not have test cases. Not only are others going to see this and ignore your module, it's also going to create unnecessary bugs for yourself and for those other folks. So we're going to write very, very simple test cases just so we can set up the basic flow in an index.test.js file. And I'm not even going to be including a framework like Mocha. We're just going to have a quick script that runs our function a few times, and we will just manually throw errors from the file if one of the test cases fail. So let's go ahead and set things up. Right here, I can add a little console.log, starting tests. And before this, we're going to go ahead and load in the function we're trying to test. So I'll make a const greeter, and we'll set it equal to, and we're going to require a local file that is inside of quotes // from the current directory. It's sitting right there, index.js. So we got the greeter function. Now we can go ahead and call it and make some assertions. I'm going to go ahead and create a const called response1, setting it equal to a call to greeter, passing in exactly 0 arguments. Now let's go ahead and make an assertion. So I'm going to check if response1 equals, using triple equals, what do we expect? We would expect this right here with the default. So that would be hello, comma, space, user, exclamation mark. So if it's equal, that's one thing. What we really want is if it's not equal. If it's not equal, we're going to throw an error. So first up, we call the function with no arguments, getting the response. Then we make an assertion about that response. If it is incorrect, we are going to throw a new error, and we will just say greeter not working with default argument. Now, obviously, if you were using Mocha or some other sort of test assertion library, you would be building your various test cases in here. For our purposes, though, this is going to be good. Now, at this point, we got one test case. Let's go ahead and create a second. I'm going to take this code and copy it, pasting it down below. We'll change it to response2, and we'll pass something into greeter like Andrew. And in that case, we would expect Andrew to sit right here instead of the default user, and make sure to change this to response2 as well. We're also going to change that error. Let's say greeter is not working with name argument. Perfect. And I'll fix the typo up above as well, changing this to uppercase G greeter. Excellent. Now that we have our test cases in place, we can go ahead and set up package.json, the test script. It is going to run node index.test.js, and now we can run that down below in the terminal using npm run test, like we've done plenty of times before. What happens? The tests start, everything seems to go well, and it finishes. Now, if our project was broken, let's say, for example, we had a bug that added an extra exclamation point, what would we get when we run npm test? Well, we would actually get errors. We're getting errors because one of our if statements does pass, which means we throw the error, and right here we get an error. Greeter not working with default argument. So that's going to let us know that something is indeed wrong. Now, the cool thing about this is we're also going to be able to run those test cases before publishing. So let's say we think we're ready for the next release. We go ahead and we change the code and we bump up our version to 1.2.0. What's going to happen when I run npm publish? Npm publish would work as expected. It would publish this buggy code. So what we're going to do is we're going to tap into another script. This is a npm lifecycle script that's going to allow us to do something before publishing. Now, if you want a complete rundown on all of these scripts available to you, you can find them on the npm docs. Google npm scripts. Head over to the scripts page, and there is a long list of all of the scripts that are built in by default and exactly when they run. The page is super long. It comes into a ton of detail about how all of this works, which is really useful. For our purposes, though, we're just going to add one. Right here, alongside of test, we are going to add pre-publish. Pre-publish is going to run before we publish the code. In our case, we're going to use npm test to run our test suite. So we can run the test suite on its own, or before we publish, we could automatically run that test suite. So let's go ahead and play around with this. npm publish. We're going to try to publish the next version of our code, which does indeed have bugs. I'm going to run it. Right here, we can see that the program crashed, and it crashed for the exact same reason. We're seeing that the Mead module 1.2.0 version had its pre-published script fail. And if we scroll up more, we can see the actual error. We have the exact same error message printing. So using this pre-published script, we can check for those bugs. We can run our test suite before releasing a new version. Now, if we go ahead and remove the error, we will be able to publish to NPM without running into any problems. Right here, I can rerun npm publish. It's going to run the test cases. The test cases are all going to pass, and we have a brand new version of our module published. So when you are creating a module, even if it is very simple and it solves a super simple problem, I still recommend setting up a set of test cases and setting up that pre-publish script. This is going to prevent you from ever releasing buggy code out into the world, which is something that you should be ideally working towards. Before we go, if we do head over to the browser, we can go over to npm.js.com/package/, and this is where you can see the packages I've looked at recently: React, history, Babel preset env. In our case though, right after this slash, we're going to type in our module name. Mine is Mead module. When I type this in, it's going to bring us over to that module page, and right here we can see that our module was indeed published. We got the latest version. It's the latest version of 3 releases. We have instructions. We got stats. It's all showing up like you would see this for any other module. Now, obviously, we're not getting any documentation. We don't have a README page. So let's go ahead and make that our final release. I'm going to make a brand new file, readme.md, and we're going to add just a little bit of markdown. I'm going to add a title after the $, Mead module, and I'll add a little bit of text. This is a test module. Please ignore. Perfect. So we got our new changes for the new version. We can bump this up as a patch release. So 1.2.1, I can save package.json, and we can go ahead and publish this. Now, we haven't ignored readme.md. It's not part of our gitignore file, so it is going to be included with the next version. If I go ahead and publish things, we can wait for the publish script to finish. And once it does, we should be able to refresh the page. This time around, we're getting our text. This is a test module. Please ignore. And we are also seeing the brand new version, 1.2.1. All right, that is it for this quick mini course on creating your own NPM module. If you enjoyed this one, please take a moment to subscribe over at mead.io, mead.io, and you'll get about 1 email every 1 or 2 months with content just like this. At this point, we have a basic NPM module. From here, you have a great boilerplate. You can build on it, expand on it, and make this as complex as you need. I'll see you next time.